The word nationalist, ladies and gentlemen, Theodore Roosevelt was a big Republican progressive. As you know, he ran as a third-party candidate when Taft was president, and he ran under the Progressive Party, called the Bull Moose Party was the nickname, but it was the Progressive Party, running against Taft and running against Wilson. And Wilson was also an intellectual and a progressive, and he won. So basically, if Taft, who today we consider a rhino, running against two progressives. Theodore Roosevelt gave a very famous speech, which I wrote about and talked about, on August 13, 1910. Very famous speech. And it was a speech with which he was assisted by the progressives. And it was a speech that was printed in the New Republic, which was considered back then a very progressive publication, that is, of the hard left. And he gave a speech, and the speech was called The New Nationalism. And the speech was widely admired by progressives of the era, and it's widely admired today by progressives. The phrase New Nationalism was actually coined not by Roosevelt, but Crowley. Herbert Crowley. Who's Herbert Crowley? We've talked about him in the past, but Herbert Crowley was one of the founding intellectuals of the modern-day progressive movement. The late 1800s, early 1900s, actually, the mid-1800s to late 1800s. And Herbert Crowley was actually a Marxist, dressed up as a progressive. And that's the way it works in this country. The progressive movement is, as I've said, these people are the progeny of Marxism. And so the modern usage of the word nationalism, which is why I try to wave off conservatives and constitutionalists, don't use the word nationalist, and I tried with the president, use the word Americanism, because that's what you mean. You don't mean nationalism, because nationalism means this all-powerful federal government. We're talking about our country, America. We're talking about Americanism. We're not talking about a government that is big as it needs to be or should be or can be. We're talking about a people and a country that is as big as it needs to be and should be and can be, right? So terminology is important. When I heard the president say that, of course, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's using a progressive term. These people compare it to Hitler and Stalin. But it's their phrase. It's the phrase of the left. It's the phrase of the progressive movement. It's the phrase of the progeny of Marxism. The New Nationalism speech, which I just talked about. The New Nationalism speech. And what did he say, Roosevelt, in this New Nationalism speech? He goes down a long list of policy agenda items that today would make the hard left very, very happy, unmooring us from our constitutional system. Roosevelt attempted to both downplay the relevance of history, typical of the progressive approach, and use Lincoln and the Civil War to justify almost boundless modern interventions by the federal government in private life, especially the economy. He wrote and said, "I do not speak of this struggle of the past merely from the historic standpoint. Our interest is primarily in the application today of the lessons taught by the contest a half-century ago. It is of little use for us to pay lip loyalty to the mighty men of the past unless we sincerely endeavor to apply the problems of the present, precisely the qualities which in other crises enable the men of that day to meet those crises." You want to read more of it? It's in here. But the point is this. Just like the hard left, forget about the Declaration. Forget about the Constitution. What made those men great back then is that they devised a government and before that fought a revolutionary war to address the issues of the day. So we have nothing to learn from them but that. So the world begins today, which is basically the progressive mindset. Roosevelt was a leading progressive politician of his day. The progressive movement had a big following within the Republican Party. It was actually the Democrat Party that resisted it for a period of time. And then, of course, you get Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, and then it's off to the races. But the term nationalism, National Socialist party, the Nazis, and notice they don't mention the socialist part. They never say when somebody says, I'm a democratic socialist, well, you must be a Nazi, because the Nazis used the term socialist, right? They'll never say that. But Trump says nationalist, we all know what he means. They go, whoa, that's like Hitler and Stalin. No, it's like Crowley and Dewey and Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt. The new nationalism of the new left today. That's their term. That's their phrase.